Hi, I'm Mitch, and welcome to the Restoration Road, where my guest today is my longtime friend, Sarah Westfall. Sarah is an amazing young lady, an author, a speaker, a mom, a wife, and she's going to open up her heart today and share transparently about one particular valley where God met her face to face. Sarah, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
I love your mom and dad. I've known of your mom most of my life. I used to go in with a kid into her mom's restaurant where she would run it, and we thought she looked a little like my mom.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up in your house?
Ooh, you know, I had it good, and really good in a lot of ways. There was never a doubt in my mind that my parents loved me and that they love God. You know, there was, I'm sure, a lot of things that bumps and bruises, just as I'm a parent now learning, oh, that's just, you know, they were being human in their parenting. But it was good. It was a stable environment to grow up as a kid and to get to know about God and coming of age and all those things. So yeah, it was good.
I got to be around you a lot at Lakewood Park Christian School.
Yep.
It was so much fun. Your senior year, you applied for a very special scholarship. Can you describe how that unfolded?
Yeah. Goodness. You're really taking me back now. Yeah, my senior year, I applied for the Lilly scholarship, full ride, and it was kind of the first from Lakewood to take a stab at it. I just remember being incredibly nervous about that process, about putting myself out there. Didn't have a lot of expectations, but just, you know, wanted to at least try. And ended up being able to be one of the recipients that year of that scholarship. And, you know, that helped me make a lot of decisions after that of where to go to school, because I was kind of looking in-state, out-of-state, and yeah, kind of set that.
It's a full ride that covers almost everything, right?
It does. Yeah, it did. It covered everything. So
I remember talking to your mom. I thought it was really, really cool right after that. Or I think we all learned the same day when it happened. I was so excited for you.
Yeah.
Where'd you decide to go?
Indiana Wesleyan.
And what'd you major in?
I majored in English Ed. Taught for about a semester. I graduated in December, taught in the spring where I had student taught, and then never taught English again. So.
How many years later was it that Michael won the same scholarship?
Yeah, my brother's 2 years younger, so 2 years later.
So I kept telling your parents for quite a while, all you do is produce Lilly Scholars. How did you meet your husband, Ben?
Short story, he was in a band.
What did he play?
Bass guitar.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the, you know, kind of mellow bass guy in the background. But when we started dating, he was actually working at Walmart here in Auburn. He had taken time between his freshman year in college and thought that they were going to be doing the Christian rock band thing. Didn't pan out, working at Walmart, and then we started dating kind of that summer in between my senior year of high school and freshman year of college, and he was en route to go back to college. So,
wow. So
here in Auburn.
How long did you date?
Before we got married?
Yeah.
Yeah, we dated about 2 years total. It was about a year and a half before he asked me to marry him. We were little babies. Yeah.
And he's had quite a career. Can you talk about what his steps in his career have entailed?
Yeah, he graduated from Anderson University with a degree in music business, specifically audio engineering. Worked for Gaither Studios in Alexandria for a while.
That had to be kind of cool.
Yeah, it was. And I worked next door at their little shop that they have there. And so it was kind of a fun season of our life, you know, being newly married and that being kind of our environment.
Would people come in to record like that you see in their videos and stuff?
Yes, a lot of the people you see on all the Gaither videos, but then there'd be, you know, somebody who is from a church down the road who thinks that they need to put out an album. And so some of those would come in as well. He saw all types. But then he'd also do some projects on his own. And so those would mean like after hours, be up until, 3 a.m.
Oh, wow.
And then, you know, I'm getting out of bed to go teach and he's getting in bed from a night full of recording. So he worked as a technical director for a church for a while, and then for about 6 years. And then from there, we moved to Tennessee for my job, and he worked there for Dave Ramsey as part of their creative video team, doing audio for that. Somewhere in the midst, he got his MBA, fell in love with both business and reading, and kind of fell in love with all things small business and entrepreneurship. And now we're back here in Fort Wayne, and he is running Ocean NEI, which is a community of small business owners and entrepreneurs.
Which is really, really cool.
Yeah.
You have 4 boys at home with you now, so life's never a dull moment.
No, not at all.
I think a mom of all boys is very special. You're in touch with that adventuresome side in them, and I could see that you would be a mom that could nurture all that. But in 2010, your life kind of gets hit broadside, and I want to unpack that the rest of our time together if we could.
Yeah, absolutely. In 2010, we were in our mid to late 20s. We already had our first son, Cohen. He was about 1 at the time. And it was, we had decided, okay, we're ready for number 2, got pregnant fairly quickly, and went in for that like midway ultrasound and discovered some abnormalities. We ended up having to follow up a few weeks later with a specialist down in Indianapolis. And at that point, we found out that our second son, Carter, had never developed kidneys. And while you can live without 1 kidney, at the time there were no options for life after birth. So we were told that our son would not, while he would be functioning normally inside the womb, that once he was born, that he would soon die after that.
And that's during a routine checkup?
That was, that was a specialist with that appointment, but it had come after the, when a lot of people find out whether they're having a boy or a girl, that anatomy scan and all of that. It was when we just realized that something was off. They weren't able to see things that they were supposed to, and so they needed a more detailed ultrasound after that.
How far along into the pregnancy are you when that happens?
When we started to know that things were not looking right, it was about 22 weeks, but by the time we actually got our final answer, it was about 27 weeks along. So well into our 3rd trimester by that point. And
you're going to carry Carter full term?
Yeah,
right?
we chose to carry. I don't know, it just wasn't really it wasn't a thought. I didn't think until later that we realized that we'd even been given that choice, because in our mind, that was our time with him. But also, I couldn't in my own, it would not sit well in my heart to choose the day that I knew that my son would both be born and pass away. I didn't want to have that choice.
I understand. So when you get the news that Carter has no kidneys, what emotions run through you? How do you process it spiritually?
Yeah. I remember being in this very small, dark ultrasound room, and the doctor's actually sitting down in front of me, her hands on my knees, and she's telling me this news. And I don't say this lightly, but I had this out-of-body experience in which I'm kind of looking down on this scene in the room, and I see myself kind of just robotically nodding in response, like no tears, nothing, just nodding. And I think the doctor kind of kept trying to give me information because she was like, she's not getting it, like she's not reacting. But I remember looking down on that thinking, this is not my story. I'd done everything right. I'd taken the vitamins and not eaten the lunch meat and only had 1 cup of coffee a day kind of thing. And felt very unfair. And before we left that day, there was a lot. I mean, we were there for a while. And as I was just becoming very unraveled, just everything kind of shattered in that moment. I remember very specifically before I left that building telling God, you either have to be everything you say you are, or I'm done. Like, I cannot do this.
Mm. How does he respond to that prayer?
Not with specific answers, tangible words, but with his presence. That season, we had about 7 weeks between when we found out about Carter and when Carter was born. And that became, at first it was devastating. It was both grief that was hard to handle, but God in his presence showed up so thickly that it was just very sweet as well. And so we didn't, God was just very present in that. I think of the verse in Psalms that says, God is close to the brokenhearted. And like that is what I lived. That is what I knew, because I didn't know what else to pray. I didn't know what else to read. There were no answers, but there was his presence.
How did your husband, Ben, respond? It seems usually a husband and wife process things a little bit differently.
Yeah, we definitely did. Ben carried his grief very physically. He would either be incredibly tired and need extra rest, or he was just sick to his stomach a lot. It was kind of funny. Prior to that season of our lives, I was the one who would probably more easily get emotional and react emotionally to things, and he was always very rock solid. And since that, it's kind of flipped a little bit, and that he is more, he more easily cries at things and is sentimental, and I'm a little bit more like not in some ways, and maybe just more stability in that. But he definitely carried that very heavily, and it was hard for him, I think for both of us, because on one hand we wanted to be there for each other, but we didn't know how to do that. And so we kind of came to agreement early on, because we knew the statistics of so many marriages of people who lose a child end in divorce. And I totally get it, because grief is so personal and dividing, and you're not on the same calendar.
Right.
But we just made a pact early on that we were going to tell each other everything. That even if it felt shameful, even if it felt, things that we thought we should or should not be feeling, that we were just going to tell each other, and started praying together every night.
So it's an intimate time.
Yeah. Not in a way we wanted, but
right.
Yes.
Now, in your final trimester with Carter, is he moving? Is he growing? Is he kicking?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. I just got to ask then, does that compound the pain? Because you feel this life and you know you're not going to be able to keep this life on this side?
Sometimes. I think that was the hardest, like when I would wake up in the morning and I would feel him move, but then all of the reality would kind of come flooding back to me every morning. But also, his condition, Carter's condition, prevented me from having, to get technical, the amniotic fluid that most women have, that kind of acts as a cushion between the baby and the outside world. We didn't really have that, so I felt him even more intensely than I did with other kids. So, being able to see him move and feel things, and sometimes it was a little painful even, but that actually became a huge blessing, because that became my time with him. And being able to how much can you learn about a child you can't still see, but we found ways to connect in that time, and to learn, like, I crave baked potatoes constantly. So the boy loved baked potatoes with lots of butter, lots of cheese. And responded a lot to singing and to touch and things like that. Mm-hmm.
Well, he decides to arrive about 5 weeks early.
Yeah.
Describe that day for us.
Yeah. It was 2011 in February, and we got hit with one of those famous Indiana snow that turned to then layers of ice storms. And the day before it came, because everyone knew it was coming, everybody was hunkering down, I'd had a visit with my OBGYN and said, well, what if I go into labor? Because I was supposed to deliver down in Indianapolis with the specialists down there who had seen this a little bit more versus where we were at the time was in Marion. And the doctor's like, no, it's you 5 weeks, you're gonna be fine, everything's looking normal.
Be about an hour drive, normally.
Yeah, normally, about hour and a half from where we were. And so I was like, okay. Well, of course, I go into labor and couldn't make it to Indianapolis. Like, the hospital itself was emergency only, nobody was there. Like, nobody could get anywhere. And so we had to go into the hospital where we were, and because they weren't expecting us, everyone was like, oh, you're in labor, and I'd have to be the one to be like, I need you to know. I need you to know what's gonna happen and what our situation is. And so, but what our experience became, I'm so incredibly grateful that we were forced to stay in town where we were because, for hundreds of reasons, but we ended up giving birth in the same room that two of our other boys, the one before and the one after, were born in. And to have that shared experience with them ended up being a really good thing. But even beyond that, being in a place where all of our family could get there before the storm really, really got bad. And to have them present was just a huge grace.
So you deliver,
Mm-hmm.
and you get a very special time with Carter.
Yeah. He lived for an hour, and during that hour, he received more love than a lot of people get in a lifetime. Not only were Ben and I both have big families, and they were all there, as well as a few really important friends of ours. And so, just as soon as after he was born, we just invited everybody in. And my mom kept being very concerned of, well, don't you want to hold him? And there was just something, and I did want to hold him, but there was also this sense of like, I've had my time with him. I was the only one who carried him. And so I wanted everyone else to have their moment. And so everyone was able to hold him. And then our pastor just happened to live like a block away. And it's ice and snow. He can't even get his car out of the driveway. But he puts on all his winter gear and he ran to the hospital and arrives, in a sweat and frozen sweat, and was able to dedicate Carter along with us to God right there minutes before he passed away.
Oh my.
Yeah.
And then did you have a service?
We did. Details are fuzzy now, but probably a few days later, had a service at our church. We knew how much God had moved in his short life and had his hand on his short life, on Carter's short life, and we wanted to memorialize that, as well as give everyone an opportunity to see our boy. We had pictures of him there at the funeral, and people who were able to come and to see him and to both celebrate and grieve together, because there were a lot of people who were really invested, especially we were working at a church at the time, and that whole church family were really invested in our lives and in his life, and they felt that grief pretty intensely alongside us.
Because they'd see you coming over for lunch with Ben at the office, and everybody's celebrating that with you, that you're going to have Carter, and then they end up grieving with you and walking through the whole process.
Yeah, and so it was And we were also going through at the time as a church this series called Soul Shifts, and one of those was from seen to unseen, of how God does that transformation in our souls of seeing what's kind of going on behind the tangible. And I remember that specifically with Carter. Everyone was kind of asking, God, what are you doing, behind the scenes here? What is that? So it was important for us then to have a service to give some words to maybe what we saw God doing, but just how God had already showed up, and give him glory for that.
Wow. Grief, or even darkness, I think, as you say, doesn't set in with you right away, right? It comes later. Yeah. How did that unfold?
For me, the darkest days for me was the day we found out that he wouldn't live. But then once we had passed the funeral and we eventually were back home, just us, and tried to get back into life, and the horrible aching realization that he was just gone. Because, my body literally ached to hold a baby. And even our home sometimes was hard to be in because it felt that his absence was felt. And so that was the hardest time for me, because my natural human response was wanting to escape from that pain. And so it was probably 3 months of the most intense time. But slowly being able to, the rawness of the grief lessened. And God was really faithful in helping me find things to kind of invest in outside of myself so that I wouldn't get stuck in that darkness.
You have 4 boys.
Yes.
No. And life is full. But what I love about you is you're a communicator. Talk about how God started to work in you to use this pain for the purpose of bringing healing to others.
Yeah. When we were early on, after we had found out about Carter, I started blogging, mostly to have one place where everybody could kind of know how we were doing, because it was kind of hard to retell and relive things over and over and over. So started doing that. But over the long haul, I realized that when, I'd said that phrase, "This is not my story," that it wasn't, but it was a continuation of God's story, and it was a continuation of his grace and his story of redemption in our lives. And that was something that I couldn't keep to myself because it wasn't mine. And over the years, in my interpersonal relationships, and then within the last 5 years more through my own writing and speaking, been able to share of God's faithfulness, share of how I have seen God in this season of grief and walking. That's something that it'll always be there. The hurt doesn't go away, but of learning to find God in it.
Amen. Talk about your new book.
A few months ago, I had this idea of putting out a devotional. It's called Be Still, Leaning into God When Everything Falls Apart. It was something I was just going to offer for free on my website. And then I was like, well, why don't I invite some other women to be a part of this, some other writers that I'm connected with. And it just kind of grew out of that. And as I began to put it together and saw the wisdom and quality of content that women were sharing with us, that I knew that I wanted to do something more with it. Plus, it was a lot of time and effort. And so we were able to put together, we offered it initially free to a lot of my email subscribers through my website. and then launched it on Amazon. And I'm also working, and that's the ebook version, and I'm also working on getting the paperback available soon.
When you write, what's like the perfect day and environment for that?
Conjure coffee. I love being in a coffee shop. I like being near people, but not.
Really?
I love being near people, but not necessarily like conversing with them. So I just kind of like that ambient noise. I love coffee. There's an artistic atmosphere to me, and it's inspiring. And so that'd probably be my ideal. With writing once in a while about grief and about Carter, it gets a little ugly sometimes in terms of my emotional response. And so I will then maybe find, there have been times where I've gone to this is when we were living in Tennessee, but would go to Chattanooga by myself and get a hotel room for 2 days because I knew I needed to just hash some things out. But most of the time it's coffee shop, computer, mom has the kids, so.
And do you write a devotional, or can you write almost a complete chapter in a book in that moment? How long does it take you to?
If it's just a day at the coffee shop, that's usually just like an article or blog post. But if it's a book, that's usually when I have to get away, because I almost feel like I need a recovery time before I come back into the real world.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing with us today. You're amazing. I can't wait to see what God does next with you.
Thanks, Mitch.
Sarah referenced Psalm 34:18. God is close to the brokenhearted, and he saves those who are crushed in spirit. If you're brokenhearted today, whatever the scenario may be, however great the loss, I want you to realize that God is close. He knows your every breath, your heartbeat. He knows every single thought and emotion that's going inside you. The Bible tells us that he knows your heart. He sees everything that's inside. And if you're crushed in spirit, he will save you. He will make you new again. And he will use your pain for the purpose of revealing the heart of Christ in every set of eyes that you lock with. Hi, I'm Mitch. Join Kelsey Herber, my daughter, head coach of Huntington University Volleyball, and me next week on the Restoration Road as we discuss a love that shares and cares.